All right. So I'm here with Andrea Mays and Andrew Kliman. Is that how you pronounce your name?
Yes.
Cool. And we're just going to have a general conversation about uh, what type of government is best. Is capitalism a good thing? What are its benefits and flaws? And Andrew, uh, let's start with you. You can introduce yourself, and then if you want to give basically your general critique of capitalism and what you think are its benefits and flaws.
Okay, about myself, I'm a professor emeritus, which means I'm retired, from Pace University in New York. I taught economics, by profession an economist. I've written two books. One came out in 2007 called Reclaiming Marx's Capital, a refutation of the myth of inconsistency. And the second came out in 2012, The Failure of Capitalist Production. I think it had a subtitle, but I'm not sure. It was called The Failure of Capitalist Production. Oh, yeah. Underlying Causes of the Great Recession was the subtitle. And I've written a lot of articles and things on a variety of topics. Politically, I work with a small group called Marxist Humanist Initiative, which is a Marxist humanist organization. And the organization and I have been very involved during the last few years in trying to combat Trumpism and the far right.
Okay.
So that's a brief bio of me.
Okay, and I'll have Andrea introduce herself, and then we'll jump into the rest. So, Andrea?
Okay, you might have my mic cut out for a minute here because the train is arriving, but hang on.
All right.
I'm, hang on a minute. I'm Andrea Mays, and I'm a lecturer at Cal State Long Beach in economics. I'll also be lecturing in economics at University of California at Irvine starting in January. And I'm going to sit back here. And I've been teaching economics for a little over 30 years. And I teach history of economic thought. So I teach some different systems, comparative systems. And so I'm interested in the same subject. And I have family that lived behind the Iron Curtain. So I have a great interest in the operational details of how a Marxist economy has worked in the past. I think that covers pretty much everything.
Yeah, that was great. All right, so Andrew, if you just want to get into what we were talking about before, just your general critiques of capitalism and just, your general thoughts.
Yeah, there is no question in my mind that things are not perfect. We don't live in nirvana. I am of the view that changes at the margin, which are possible in the political system that we have, would improve some of those things, and that any changes that would result in abrogation of private property would make things far worse than they are now. That's kind of the starting point for me.
Andrew, you can go ahead, just give your general thoughts.
Yeah, I'm hearing a bit of static. Okay. Well, first of all, I don't think that the regimes, in the Soviet Union, Mao's China, current China, etc., were communist, socialist, Marxist, or anything like that. I think they were state capitalist. I think they were state capitalist societies, and we can talk about that. I think they were actually, the diametric opposite of what Marx was talking about and worked for. But so it's a variety of capitalism as I see it. I mean, capitalism has done a lot very successfully. It's raised productivity, and along with that, there's been increase in people's lifespan and so forth. But the system is fundamentally flawed because all of this technological change has brought us all together. You know, we're now really one world where we depend very much all the time on one another. Um, but capitalism is a system in which nobody is looking out for our interest as a whole. Everybody is out there pursuing only their one interest, and there's a cute little fairy tale that people tell, you know, that by everybody looking out for their interests, somehow by some sort of magic or invisible hand, the interests of the society as a whole are going to be provided for. It's a fairy tale. We can see that with the climate crisis. And that's threatening, you know, the very survival of our species and many, many other species. Why is that happening? It's because of people pursuing their own self-interest without regard to anybody else. And this is a well-known problem in economics, and it's called by the polite name of externalities. These are external costs. And when you get them, and they're everywhere, and the climate crisis is a huge example of the problem, when you have these external costs, you cannot leave it to markets to do things properly. And I always just say that capitalism always seems more successful than it is. It's like a bad doctor who seems successful because he buries his mistakes. And that's what happens in capitalism. You know, you have a business, it doesn't succeed, but it vanishes, goes under. You know, the mistake is buried. People are fired, they're laid off, the mistake is buried. They go somewhere, God knows where. So I definitely think people should be more open-minded about these issues and think twice before just accepting that what we have now is the best of all possible worlds, except for the margins. Yes.
If you don't accept, yeah, if you don't accept the former Soviet countries as an exemplar of putting into operation what Marx had in mind, which I can understand why you would not want that as your example. What examples would you hold up that would be a good example of looking out for the whole? Would you look at modern Venezuela or modern Cuba as an exemplar of that?
God forbid, no. I mean, there has not been a socialist society. There have been socialist revolutions. They turned into their opposite. They didn't succeed. There's tremendous examples of self-organization, but really a society that has an economy operating according to new principles, we haven't seen that yet.
So I would begin with the premise that capitalism is not nirvana. It is not perfect. It is not the best of all possible worlds. It's just better than the alternative that has been presented. And in particular, if you begin with the idea of confiscating private property and making it owned by the people or the collective or the state, whichever choice, that you make all of the problems that you're talking about much worse. And to begin with, the only way you can do that is by the use of force. So whatever changes you imagine that are going to come that will be beneficial, you begin with an act of violence. And I don't see how operationalizing something like that, you're going to create a net benefit as a result of that. So I do not come from the perspective all's for the best in the best of all possible worlds, but that it beats the alternative of confiscating people's private property under threat of force or under use of force, as it has been historically. So begin with the idea of redistributing income. You can only do that either by using force or by threatening to use force. We do that. We decide as a society, okay, we accept that because we achieve certain benefits as a result of doing that. So we take from one group of taxpayers and we transfer to another. We take from the taxpayers who are working and we give it to the elderly who are retired, for example. We decide as a society that we're willing to accept that trade-off. But if you're going to transform the system radically and you want to confiscate property from everyone and redistribute it or use it to the benefit of the collective, whoever decides what that is, you begin that with an act that people are going to resist and you are going to have to use force. So if you want me to go into the example of the collectivization of agriculture, either in China or in Russia, both of those would be good examples of how that is accomplished.
Actually, I mean, I find I don't want to at all defend the forced collectivization either in Russia or in China, by no means. But I would like to speak about the origins of capitalism and the forcible expropriation, the taking away of property of the independent peasantry, the yeomanry in England that started all of this. This was done by violence. This was done by laws against people begging. They were driven from the land, and the land was turned into sheepwalks. This was described by Thomas More, writing at the time in his book Utopia. So this violence and taking away of people's property, either they held legal title or they had, traditional rights to the land. This is actually what capitalism is built on, because they no longer had ways to feed themselves and care for themselves because they no longer had access to the land. They were either, driven into being vagabonds, and later, more likely, like most of us, they're forced to work for other people. They're forced to do day in, day out, throughout their whole lives, what somebody else tells them. There's no gun at their head, but if they don't do that, if I didn't do that, everybody I know, if we didn't do that, we would starve. And that's a form of compulsion as I see it, even though it's not legal compulsion, and there's no guns, there's a threat of death, and there's an economic compulsion. So I'm all for moving more and more to a society where certain people don't have control over other people, where governments don't have control of people. But we have to recognize that the current society is one in which a few people have massive control over other people. And Sacha Baron Cohen had a few good things to say about that with regard to the high-tech giants a few weeks ago.
Can you give some examples of who it is that you imagine has so much control over our daily lives?
Well, as I just said, Sacha Baron Cohen gave a speech before the Anti-Defamation League, and he called out, he denounced in no uncertain terms Mark Zuckerberg, the heads of Alphabet, the heads of Google, YouTube, and so forth. He said, there's 6 big U.S. companies and the people in charge of them. And who elected these people? Nobody. Who decided that the social media and the internet will operate the way it operates? Where was society-wide decision? There wasn't any. And this is what happens when you get everybody looking out for number one, and nobody looking out for the whole. And it's corrupted our election system and much else besides.
Well, I will definitely agree with you that the election system has been corrupted, but I'm not sure I would find the same solution that you would. With regard to Zuckerberg and Google, no one is compelling you to use their services. Life is better with them, and that is why people use them. So they can complain a lot, they can change their privacy settings, but ultimately, no one compels you to use Facebook. No one compels you to use Google if you don't want to do your searches through them. If you don't want to search at all, You have all the resources available to you that were available status quo ante. So I think that's we love to hate them, and we love the products, but we love to hate them as well. So I'm not concerned because Jeff Zuckerberg doesn't have the power to make me do anything. However, the bureaucrat down the road who can force me to get a permit before I can put another toilet in my house, or who can tell me the fuel efficiency of the washing machine that I use, those petty tyrants have a lot of power over me. So I will agree with you on that I would prefer to have less power to the government. But I would say the power that Google and Facebook have over people is non-existent, except as a carrot. There is no stick.
And why does that matter?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yes, and why does that matter whether it's with a carrot or with a stick?
Because you were talking about people being forced to work for someone had the power to make them work. And then you cited Sacha Baron Cohen's comments about Zuckerberg and Google as an exemplar of being under the thumb of somebody who has a lot of control over our lives. And I would say that's a false argument.
Well, I made two different points. One is that capitalism historically and in an ongoing fashion is a system in which people are forced to work for other people under threat of, starvation. And I made a second point that we have people with a tremendous amount of power over other people. I was not trying to say that the only form of power over other people is this ability to dictate how people will work, giving them orders and so forth. The power that the tech giants have over consumers is not the power to force them to use the services, clearly not. But again, I come to my question. I mean, besides as a debate point to counter what I supposedly said, why does it matter whether the power that they exercise and the whole question of whether it's good or not, why does it matter that they have this power without explicitly forcing anybody to use their services?
Because people's choice to use the services then is the result of induction, not of coercion. And there's a difference. So if somebody induces you, something appeals to you because they offer you some product that you find creates a net benefit for you, that is a voluntary choice. And I believe that people know how to make themselves best off. And if they choose to do that, it means that they're making themselves better off. So looking at it and saying, well, we're being forced to use the product is misinterpreting what you're observing. You can say that you're being forced to, but I don't see how they would have the power to do that.
I've said, in fact, the opposite. Okay, I've said people are forced to work for other people, but here we're talking about consumers. Okay, we're not talking about working.
Right, but your question to me was what difference?
People are forced to use these services.
You said, what's the difference as to whether it is a carrot or a stick? And I just answered that. Because a carrot is something that induces people to use it. They're not being forced to use it.
I understand that there is a difference. I'm asking, why does that difference matter? And I really don't see it. I really don't see it. I mean, people are experiencing harm. They know they're experiencing harm. And nobody is forcing them, but the outcome is not good. And it's not based on thoughtful society-wide consideration, nor is it based in consideration, thoughtful consideration in individual cases. What we have is the tech giants putting up all kinds of clickbaity stuff that bypasses conscious thought processes, and people are just reacting on the internet and so forth. So,
who would you put in charge of deciding?
And I'm just not getting the moral argument that if people are not forced to do something,
Okay,
that makes it okay.
I'm going to jump
I
in
just
here.
don't get that.
Okay, here's my answer to that. Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, it seems like, Andrew, you're approaching this from kind of like a utilitarian perspective. Is that right?
Oh, I'm not
That's
sure.
right. That's right. If you observe that people are doing something, you can infer, and it's not under compulsion, you can infer that they're making themselves better off. If you assume that you know better than they do what makes them well off, I'm going to disagree with that.
Okay.
If that's what the reliance of the argument is, that someone else will know better for you what is best, I will disagree with that premise.
This is not my premise. My premise is that individuals' estimations that they are better off are relative to the situation in which they find themselves, which is a situation, in this case of the tech giants and many other cases, this is a situation not of their own choosing. Were they faced with a different situation, they might well react in a different manner. Okay?
I'm not understanding what they're not choosing. What is the situation that they're finding themselves saying that they're not choosing? I'm not understanding that.
Okay. They are faced with a situation in which a few tech giants have control over social media, much of the total media. They're not being held to account by anybody, and they make decisions based on the profit interest of their companies. That is the situation in which we find ourselves. Given that situation, you can choose to use the services on their terms. And given the situation, everybody else is doing it, and you can use the services on their terms, or you can not. But what if we had an internet and so forth that ran on an entirely different basis? Then people might not. Let's say we had those options. Okay, then people might not want to do what they do now, which is basically give over all their information, their privacy to these companies, let Putin's government and other governments, interfere with our elections, let the trolls come and dominate everything. These are not things that people want, okay? But they do choose them given the very limited options that are available to them. But the fact that these options are very limited, this is not something that we have chosen.
What do you suggest would provide that alternative?
I'm sorry, she broke up. I couldn't hear.
Who would you suggest would provide the alternative, the parallel internet that you're describing?
I'm still hearing a lot of...
Yeah. Who would provide the alternative to that?
Who would provide the alternative to the current way in which the internet functions?
Yeah, are you talking about basic government regulation of these industries, or are you talking about fundamentally like changing how the internet functions?
Well, here's what I'm talking about. See, I don't accept the premise, okay, we have capitalism, and then if you want to change something, you're guilty of coercion. We have the internet. Here it is. It's always existed. This is human nature. And you want to go changing the internet? Who are you? Well, it hasn't always existed.
No. That's not my argument at all. My argument would be if I'm in opposition to Google and Facebook and I see, people don't really want that. They just accept this because they have no alternatives. That's an opportunity for me. Someone can provide, if that's really true, then someone else can provide that service in parallel with them. And before you say, oh no, they're too big, look at the history of American industry. If you had suggested there was an alternative to Standard Oil, you would have been laughed out of the room. If you had suggested there's an alternative to IBM, you would have been laughed off the planet. If somebody desires something that is different from what Google and Facebook are providing, that provides an opportunity for somebody to provide it. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying the internet is perfect the way it is. That's a false argument.
Well, you've said two things I think are kind of opposite. One is it's not perfect. The other is people use it, so they must like it, so they must be benefiting. And who are you to say that it's not the case?
That's correct. I would agree with your second assessment. That I believe that if people are doing something, you can't look at them and saying they're doing it and making themselves worse off. I don't understand how you can make the argument either for an individual or collectively. So the state decided for decades that advertising of X or Y or Z at certain times of the night was not a good idea for the whole. Who decides what is good for the, who decides what is good for the whole? So I'm wondering to whom you want to give the job of making the assessment if we can't just look at people and say, look, they're using it, it must make them better off.
Right. Do you see the contradiction in your position?
Not at all.
Okay, you've said that the internet is not perfect, yet you've said individuals are using it and they're making the decisions for themselves that this is good. So who are you to tell them that it's not good?
Right. I don't see why there's a contradiction in that. If internet is not perfect, services are not perfect, that provides the perfect opportunity for someone else to say, oh, look, I can give you Facebook without the downside.
Okay, so, well, you're using terms like not perfect, but that means that you are making judgments that what people are doing is not good in some ways.
No, I'm not.
You say the internet is not perfect. And you say that on what basis is somebody to judge what other people are doing if they do it voluntarily?
No, you started out with the claim that somehow we're not taking into account the greater good of the way people are consuming something, that even if it makes them better off or they think it makes them better off, we have a better way of assessing whether it's making you better off or not. And my contention was to begin with that what's the alternative to allowing people to have the free choice to do things that make them better off? And who are we to second guess them as to whether they'd be better off not using Google? Oh, you'd all be better off not using Google. Or you'd be better off not using Facebook.
I did not make any argument as to would you be better off or would you not be better off. Right now at this point, I want to come back to this because about how the internet is set up, because I haven't gotten engagement with the real point, but there's a contradiction in your position because you're saying that the way people use the internet and the way it's set up is problematic in some regards. Yet you're saying, people should choose, and if they choose, it's good for them, and nobody should stop that. Okay.
No, actually, what I was responding to was your contention that my argument was that capitalism is perfect, and I'm saying it's far from it, and certainly not the internet is not perfect, but that there is room for improvement. And if as you say, people are using something despite characteristics of the product, that provides an opportunity for someone else to provide an alternative.
Right. That's okay. And right now I'm trying to get at this contradiction that I think you're not seeing between you saying that it's not perfect and you saying who is X, who am I to judge that something is not perfect if this is what people are supposedly voluntarily choosing.
I think the internet not being perfect is her general assessment of it, right? But she's saying we shouldn't be deciding for individuals whether they engage in that imperfect product or not.
If that's all she's saying, I have no problem with that. But I don't think that that's what she's saying. I think that what she was saying, she can speak for herself, is that since people are making these choices and no one is explicitly coercing them, it is good for them. And nobody should second guess or really be allowed to second guess their revealed preferences.
That's
Things
not
being said.
that's not exactly what I said, but I'd actually agree with that. That's not actually what I said, but I would agree with that.
Then why
That
are you second guessing their revealed preferences?
I'm not second guessing their revealed preferences. So let's say, for example, I drive a Volvo, and that's not the perfect car. Whose decision is it? Mine or someone else who says, oh no, that's not X or Y enough? It's the same thing. You're looking at somebody consuming a product and deciding, oh, we'd be better off deciding for them whether they're actually better off or not by consuming the product. And Sean's right. That's a utilitarian argument. And I would put my faith in people's ability to decide what makes them better off rather than in someone else's ability to decide that for them. That's the argument I made. That's it.
Yes, I understand that. I'm just trying to point out that there's a glaring contradiction there. But I want to come back to the real point with the internet. The way this shell game that I've gotten myself into works is we assume that capitalism already exists. We assume that the internet already exists. And then we say, okay, here, you got a choice to use it as is, or, take your marbles and go home, and sit in the dark in the basement. The internet, capitalism did not always exist. The internet did not always exist. During my lifetime, and probably yours, not you, Sean, the internet probably did not exist. Who was responsible for allowing the internet, which dominates our lives, to, be created in a process without any social oversight, without any forethought, and just to let the chips fall where they may? This is not a responsible way of behaving, in which the chips just fall where they may, and no one is there to look out with respect to the consequences for anybody other than themselves. Okay, even families don't do that. They take care of their little kids and so forth. They take care of their other loved ones who are adults. It's not a responsible way for human beings to interact, and this is the problem. So I'm just not going to accept, this has always existed, which it obviously has not in the case of the internet, and we choose it. Did we choose to have the internet function in this manner to begin with, rather than just once it exists like this, we choose to use it rather than not use it? I don't think so.
So I've presented you with the alternative. I would not expect the internet is going to look the way it does now in 15 years, in 5 years.
Okay, so if I don't like my car, I can start an automobile company.
If there are enough people who share your view, and if there aren't, then you can unplug and take your marbles and go home, as you said. But if there are enough people who share that vision, then yes, that's exactly how it works. That's exactly how it works.
I can start my auto company, right? I just come up with $2 billion worth of capital. I mean, it doesn't work like that at all.
But excuse me, but it does. So go back again to the Industrial Revolution, and someone would have said exactly the same thing as you just did about Standard Oil, about IBM, about AT&T. Oh my gosh, we're going to have only one source of information if AT&T Time Warner merge. Oh my gosh. And it didn't happen, did it? We're terrified of Yahoo and AOL having control over all of the news that was going to be online. That didn't happen. Why? Because the flaws in those products presented an opportunity to somebody else to come up with an alternative that people preferred without whatever the downside was. So if you remember, AOL had a walled garden approach. They were going to be the monopoly for entertainment, for email, for news, for magazines. And the way the model worked was you essentially paid your fee for the month and you got into the AOL universe, and then you were trapped there. You couldn't get any information that wasn't controlled by AOL. They were the largest ISP at the time of the AOL Time Warner merger, 29 million subscribers, was the largest ISP at the time. And what happened to them? How many people now get their information from AOL? And the answer is probably close to zero, because someone said, people don't like being walled in and having AOL control all the information that they have, and offered them an alternative. So now you have Yahoo was the first, then Gmail, etc., and on down the road. So I think that's a better alternative than someone else saying this is good for you, but I think it's not.
Which you yourself have said. You are guilty of that contradiction. But I would like you to respond to my point about the historical origins of capitalism and how it's based on expropriation and violence and taking away people's property. And that is why most of us are in a situation in which we have to work for other people and do what they say, whether we want to or not, which we don't, under threat of starvation. That is the situation that we face. And you haven't engaged with this issue, and it is the principal social problem, in my view, in the developed world today, that we get up, we have to do what somebody else says. We get up the next day, we have to do what somebody else says, and we have to do this until we're retired. And then we have to raise kids, and we have to raise kids and put them in the same situation. And the alternative to that is a social revolution in which we reclaim property for ourselves so that we don't have to have someone else, quote, lend us the property so we can keep from starving.
So that if we, for example, confiscate the factories, then who will run them?
You're not engaging with my point.
Yes, I am. I'm trying to engage. I'm trying to engage with your point about having to be forced to go to work. If someone else ran everything, let's say the Dalai Lama ran all of industry, would you still have to go to work? Or could you just not work?
It's not a question of going to work. It's a question. No, it's not. It's not at all a question of going to work. Before the peasants were expropriated, they worked. They worked hard. They worked on the land. They worked in their farms. The difference is they were not working for somebody else under threat of under economic compulsion, threat of starvation. So it's not a question of working or not working.
Okay, but so I have two answers then. One is, don't work for someone else, work for yourself. That's answer number one. And answer number two is, I'm still trying to imagine what the alternative is that nobody has to go to work and nobody has to work for anyone else. So who do you work for? On behalf of the collective?
You work for yourself. You work for yourselves the way the independent peasantry did. Mm-hmm. Either individually or in some larger formation, okay?
Right.
But the point is that they had their own property. They had the means by which they could make their living without having to obey the dictates of somebody else. And I think it's very disparaging of hundreds of millions of people to say go work for yourself. It's not like we haven't thought of this.
Well,
I mean,
the alternative is you're compelling someone else to work for you.
I live in the United States. I think you do. A country in which people dream about being able to work for themselves to get out of this situation, and very few people find themselves able to do so. Okay, it's not like we haven't thought of this. It doesn't work.
Okay,
just doesn't
hold on. I want to take a pause for a second. Because there's 2 points that you guys or that Andrea wants to address, and I want to address them both too. The first is how easily can the average person go into business for themselves, right? And the second is what would be the alternative? And I want to start with the first one.
I don't accept the way you constructed the first one. It's not a question of how easy is it to go into your own business. Okay, I mean, first of all, anybody can set up a greeting card company or something like that. Okay, so the question is, how many people all at once are able to run businesses that provide them with enough income or whatever so that they don't have to work for somebody else? So it's a
That's
question
fair.
not only of an ability to set it up, but an ability for all of these people to succeed, or at least a large majority of them to succeed. Okay, that's the way I would pose the question.
Fair enough.
And I would say it's not easy enough for people to set up businesses. So that would be an obstacle. That's low-hanging fruit, is to take away the obstacles to people being able to be entrepreneurs. So I would agree with that. Make it easier. Absolutely. The government should not be in the business of preventing people from being able to work for themselves. I agree with that.
What about the business of capitalists and the police to keep people from being in business for themselves by monopolizing property, so that they don't have any? Most of us don't have any property in means of production. What about that?
I don't understand what you're talking about. What monopolization of production and what?
Monopolization of means of production, monopolization of resources. I don't mean monopoly in the sense of a single agent, but a small.
What other sense does it have?
I'm saying there is a class of people who own and control the principal resources, the principal means of production, the things that we need in order to live. Okay, there's a class of society that does this. These means of production are not available to everybody, so that we can all make our living without doing the bidding of somebody else. That's what I'm saying.
Well, and I agree that it should be as easy as possible to become a person like that. Not everybody is going to be able to be capable of that, but that we should take away the obstacles to that. I have no problem with that.
Well, people are capable of it because I come
in the
back
sense of a single. What does monopoly mean? If not somebody who has exclusive control over something, and I'm still trying to imagine. Can you give me an example of what you mean by that? Because if we're going back to Google and Facebook, we're back. I have the same objection.
Okay. First of all, I'm using monopolize or monopoly in the sense of one class, one social group monopolizes these resources. That is, they are preventing the rest of us from having that. And you find it objectionable when the government prevents things from happening. You don't seem to find it objectionable when these people prevent others from having access to what they need to make a living.
I'm trying to get an idea of who you mean.
Let me finish. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, I forgot the second point, but I would like to urge that we stick with one point at a time.
Sean, I have about 5 minutes left before I go underground. So you're going to lose me. I'm at Yankee Stadium almost. So I'm going to be going underground in a moment. So I have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
The other point I wanted to make is when Andrea said that most people will not, or not everybody, will be able to work for themselves instead of working for somebody else. It's an historical fact that in most of human history, people do work for themselves rather than for bosses. And it was the case of the English peasants. The whole class of people, they worked for themselves. They didn't work for other people. So, I don't know where we get this idea that people are not capable of that. People have, and people haven't.
If I argued to you that everyone should be their own boss and their own entrepreneur, I imagine you would have come back and said not everybody can do that.
No, I wouldn't have said that. I mean, I'm sure
everyone
have
their own
that
business.
It's true that not everybody can do that. And this whole idea of entrepreneurship is something I reject. But no, that would not have been my response. But technically, yes, it's correct. Not everybody.
Andrea, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. You said you're going to go under Yankee Stadium,
No,
and so we'll.
yeah, I'm going underground in the train, so you're going to lose me in about 5 minutes.
Right.
So I
And
would like to ask, what
are you
is your
going to come back
attitude
after
toward,
that, or is that it?
That's it. I'm going to be underground until Grand Central.
Okay.
what's that, about 15 minutes?
Yes.
But Grand Central is like crazy. It's like noisy as hell.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think I have about 5 minutes left.
Right. So, I mean, I still haven't gotten a response to how you regard this expropriation of people, driving them off the land, and this the consequent situation in which they're only voluntary choices whether to work for somebody or not, when at a different moment in time they could have had the voluntary choice, which I think most of us would regard as preferable, of working for themselves.
I'm not really sure how that relates to what we're talking about for today. Is the alternative to go back to people living on the land and individual parcels of property? Okay. Again, what are you drawing the parallel? In which case, I'll agree with you that it all began with violence. Whether you collectivize things or you don't, it can all begin with violence. Okay.
That's
and then
part
where do we go from here?
Right.
Where do you go from here?
Right. It's part of my point, but my point also relates back to the internet situation. It goes back to this issue of we're being said to voluntarily make choices among very narrow alternatives. Okay, and these alternatives did not always exist. So that's my real issue with the internet, is what we should have had is a process by which we thoughtfully and together work out what kind of internet we want and think through the consequences. And that didn't happen. And we have to move to a kind of society where something like that never happens again, as well as repair what we have. That's really what I'm trying to drive at here.
Yeah.
Well,
So.
and who would you propose somebody like the United Nations be the ones who decide this? Who would decide?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think there are various ways in which decisions can be made. And there are ones that are more democratic and less, and more participatory and less. But, there's a lot of things that would have helped that never got done because of this crazy fairy tale that you just let people do whatever they want, and it's as if by an invisible hand it all works out for the best, or except for the margins, and it's not perfect and so forth, but it's a fairy tale. It's not the reality.
Okay, as opposed to what, though? So as an economist, I want to compare to what? So if you're proposing that we make decisions collectively?
I'm not proposing any one particular thing. I'm saying there's a variety of ways in which
but not
deliberation could have
anything but capitalism.
I'm sorry?
Anything but capitalism?
Well, I mean, I was speaking specifically of the unplanned and anarchic way in which the internet arose. Okay, it's not. I'm not at this point talking about all of capitalism, although in general it's anarchic and unplanned and so forth. But basically, I think that where you have decisions that affect lots of people should have a say, and lots of people should be involved in deliberations, either directly or indirectly, some combination. There's a variety of things. It's not for me to say even how the decision should be made.
Well,
okay,
I'm glad to hear that. Mm-hmm.
How would we move in that direction, in your opinion? How would we move? Yeah,
in my opinion.
Yeah, how would we move towards something that's more like what you would like to see as a society?
Well, the first thing is we got to get rid of Donald Trump and Trumpism and so forth. I mean, that's an immediate threat to the planet, to almost all of us on it. But we need more discussions like this. We need a left wing that is not so accepting of capitalism and just thinking about, moving the money around, because it's really not a matter of redistribution. It's really a matter of the way we work, who dominates over other people, and so forth. So, the first priority is to get discussion of these issues. Okay. Once we have discussion of the issues, then we can see where we can go from there. I mean, it would be crazy for me to sit here, and say I have the solution to everything. I don't. But at least I know what I think are the key issues that are under discussed and need more discussion.
Well, and likewise, I am not saying that there are no flaws in the current system. I just haven't heard anything that was proposed that to me seemed like an improvement. That's all. So if you have a suggestion, I'm willing to entertain them.
Okay. So the idea is I'm supposed to propose an entire alternative social system that has not been tried, and you don't know whether it would work, and I don't know whether it would work. Okay. When the fact, oh, there you are. When the fact is we know what we have now, and we know that it does not work for most of us. Okay. So to my mind, instead of like going into utopian, ramblings about what could be, let's take stock of our situation, say this is not working for us. Let's try something else that is good for all of us, or at least the vast majority of them.
Andrea, you don't have audio now.
We don't have to start with the solution. We need to start with a recognition of the problem.
I would say that if you're born on this planet today, you have a better shot at doing well if you're in a capitalist economy than if you're not. With all its flaws, you'd rather be born here with all the flaws here, including the internet, than be born somewhere else.
And that's, again, these alternatives that are being posed in a very circumscribed manner, a very narrow manner.
No, I'm saying pick any country in the world. I'm
saying pick a deliberative process whereby we can call into question this society as well and maybe change it for the better. Make that among the alternatives. Don't accept the given. We have the power to change things. We don't have to accept these rules that have been imposed on us by the people, the small group of people who benefit from this situation.
Okay, well, I have a question, because